Game review, game review. Hello, my name is Caleb Denby, and today we're going to be doing a game from the Tata Steel Masters tournament where Alireza Firouzja, who was off to a hot start, ran into the one, the only Magnus Carlsen. So today we'll see how that game went and see some ideas in playing with a little space versus playing with a lot of space. So let's just jump into it. The game started with e4, e5. A fairly common opening, as those of you who play chess may already know. The Roy Lopez, knight f6, signifying the Berlin. White plays d3 and d6, avoiding, of course, the endgame line. After c3, we see a6 from Magnus, bishop a4, and bishop e7. Not the most common line, but definitely it has been tested before. Castles, castles. This rook comes to e1, this rook comes to e8. Now knight b d2. This bishop comes back to f8. And we see h3, preventing any pins. And now b5 from black, bishop c2, bishop b7, and d4. So I won't go into all the opening nuances of the Roy Lopez because I don't understand them. However, g6 from black here aims to give this bishop some options along this diagonal. And the theme of the game is going to be that white has this nice little center, and black is going to be trying to challenge it in various ways. And we'll see, actually, after a3 and knight b8, black is rerouting this knight, perhaps to d7, as well as freeing up the option to bring this pawn out to c5 or even to c6, depending on how the game continues. And here, white made a very, very strange choice. I think Firouzja was a little bit hasty in his decisions here. There are some ideas for white in this position, like a4, trying to break down this b5 pawn, as well as b4, with the idea of a later a4. You can also play things perhaps like knight f1, maybe bring this knight out to this side of the board, although you do have to be careful. I don't think you can play knight f1 here due to the e pawn being hanging. Even a move like b3 can be played, but the move that Alireza played is very committal. He played d5 here, which is taking a lot of space. But the downside to having space is always that you're leaving weaknesses behind. In this case, the c5 square is a very, very relevant weakness that is being left behind. You might think, well, we have this move b4, if we ever need it, to protect the c5 square. But Magnus ensured that b4 was never really going to be a problem for him. And he did so by playing the annoying move c6. By playing this move, you're challenging the white center immediately, and you're kind of forcing white to play a move like c4 to defend this center. D takes c6 is playable, but after bishop takes, you're going to run into an eventual d5, and the black pieces are really going to be freed by this. So instead, Alireza does choose c4, but now, after a few more moves, we see knight b d7, like I said, aiming for the c5 square. We see a4 from white, hoping to break down this b5 pawn. But now, simply queen c7, eyeing some pieces on this open file, or soon-to-be open file here. And now after b3, you can really see white is committing to defending these pawns on the light squares. And that's leaving behind the c5 square, which is very, very relevant. So now I wanted to talk about how good at chess Magnus Carlsen is. It's a topic that has not been explored very much, I know. But he really understands this position well, I think, judging from this game. When you are down in space, the downside to having a lack of space is usually that your pieces don't have squares. You just don't have enough squares to put your pieces on. But here, despite white's massive center, Magnus actually finds great squares for all of his pieces. And then white's space advantage turns out to be rather useless. He does so by starting with rook e8, like I said, eyeing the pieces on this file. And now after rook a2, he takes on c4 and takes on c4. And then I'll let you at home try and find Magnus's next move because it's actually a very, very nice move. It's the best move in the position, and it guarantees that this bishop will have a home in the future, an active space to be on. All right, good luck. Hopefully you found it. It is a5. This move guarantees that this bishop will have an open diagonal where it can eye some weaknesses in the white position. And if we just take a quick look at how the pieces are organized, the black rook and queen are placed on a file which could open at any moment at black's choosing. This rook will have an open b file to go to. This bishop will have an a6 square to go to. This knight is well placed on f6, challenging the white e-pawn. This knight can come to c5, challenging two white weaknesses. This bishop can come out to h6, another open diagonal. All of black's pieces have very, very active squares to go to, and white is actually kind of trapped by his own space. He's trapped behind his own pawns, and these knights look rather awkward. These rooks are a little discoordinated, uncoordinated even. And the fact is, the space that Alireza has is useless if his pieces can't find squares. And Magnus found active squares for all of his pieces rather effortlessly here. And because of that, black is simply better in this position. White does continue with knight f1, trying to improve his own pieces. This bishop comes out to a6, like we expected. Knight e3 defends this weakness. But now knight c5. Knight d2, and white is taking a purely defensive stance for the moment. Black chooses this moment to open up this c file. And now, like we said, this rook has a nice home on the b file. This bishop comes out to a3. This queen actually comes back to d8 now, allowing for this rook to recapture on c5 and eyeing some squares on the king side as well. This queen comes out to f3. Magnus, of course, has already defended this knight. Now we see h5 for Magnus, taking some kingside space for himself. Rook a to a1 for Firouzja. Now bishop h6. And this is really the moment where you see Magnus had a plan for all of his pieces. This bishop comes out this way. This queen eyes some squares on the king side. These knights attacking these weaknesses. And this bishop as well, also eyeing some important squares with the rooks on the open files. This is exactly what you want to do when you have less space. If you have squares for your pieces, you're happy. Rook a b1 is played. After a trade, we see king g7 from Magnus, shoring up these pieces. Knight e to f1 is Firouzja's choice. Now h4 further cramps these white knights. Knight e3, and this bishop comes to f4, and the threats are starting to mount on white's king side. And Firouzja simply plays knight e to f1 again. Perhaps he's lacking some options here to improve his pieces, so he resorts to repeating. This queen comes out to c7, looking at some dangerous squares. g3 is Firouzja's attempt at freeing his pieces, but after h takes and f takes, this bishop just drops back to h4. And after h4, queen d7, g3 has actually just weakened white's position a little bit too much. King g2, but this queen was actually forking these two squares, so now knight takes a4, and the end is near. We see this trade. We do see this bishop capture on d6, but now queen d4 is a nice move, hitting this knight on d2. And after queen f2, queen takes f2, king takes f2, Magnus's next move actually forces resignation. That move is bishop takes f1. White has three choices to recapture this bishop, but in fact, all of them end up losing a piece. King takes or rook takes, both fail to bishop takes d2. And if you play knight takes d2, there's this very annoying check, knight e4, picking up the bishop. So Magnus simply ends up winning a piece at the end of the day. So I think this game was a very instructive way to show how to play with less space. You just find squares for your pieces, and then you don't really have to worry about your lack of space at all. Magnus Carlsen, once again showing why he's Magnus Carlsen, why he's the #1 player in the world, really dominating Firouzja in this game. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Game Review. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.